Then we went to what I call this hybrid training. I just made this term up. I don't know what you want. This is when CAD started coming in. Still had apprentice type programs. I say mostly, and the reason I say that is owners bought this computer and this fancy new system, and he needs somebody to run it. Well, maybe the chief draftsman doesn't know how to run it, and we've got somebody a little younger, a little newer that knows how to run it. So maybe that person's doing stuff that they're not qualified for. Maybe they don't have the experience, but they know how to run a computer. So you have the traditional molds start to break down here. Less field experience. Maybe the new guy that can run a computer has never seen any field. So you start to see a little less experience here. You still got your traditional chief draftsman, you still got your traditional checkers, but they're not supervising the same people they used to be supervising. They used to know, here's what I've got, here's where they came from. You don't have that anymore. Maybe they've got this new guy that doesn't know steel, and he's running his computer, and I'm having to manage him too, and it's causing me twice as many headaches. CAD capabilities go up, experience goes down. Does this sound familiar to anybody? All right, I'm on the right pace anyway. Everybody's awake. I'm at least talking the right subject. Good job. This is where I came in at. I started in '95. So I started, my first job was actually sitting around changing out paper on a 8-pin plotter. You know, I would do some scrubbing at first, I would do some anchor bolt plans, but mostly I changed out vellum for my first 3 weeks of the job. But I grew up a little different. My dad was a project manager for a steel fabricator, and OSHA wasn't quite as stringent as they are right now. So I was on the 22nd floor of catwalks at some buildings downtown when I was 6 years old. I never had a chance, they tell me. I was always going to be in the steel business. I started working in a fabricator's office when I was 15 as a summer job. It was buying bolts, it was back checking entries on estimates, nothing groundbreaking, just being in the business. I then left and went to Opryland Theme Park, which doesn't exist anymore. Worked there for 8 years, started selling hats, and when I left, I was the head of the gaming operation in the park. Obviously, it has nothing to do with steel except for managing people and scheduling. That's where I learned how to manage people, learn how to handle schedules, handle different people. Going through school as a civil engineer, I started as a detailer while I was finishing college. My dad, again, was a project manager, and when the market crashed in the 90s, he went 2 or 3 different jobs. He ended up working for a metal building company. And the detailer that worked for him in the 70s and 80s, he was working for at night, moonlighting and detailing. Got me a job there, and that's how I got through I do this detailing to get through college real quick while I finish up before I go be a real engineer. I stayed 22 years later, 24 years later, here I am. I got thrown into doing 2D CAD layouts because I had the CAD experience. I knew how I could visualize it, I knew how it worked, and I could punch the button. So in a week and a half, I was the head of their CAD department. At this time, they were using CAD Vantage, I think it was, for their 3D modeling. They still did a lot of paper, but we also had 2D, couldn't even afford AutoCAD, I think we had SmartCAD. We were using 2D SmartCAD, and I was in charge of the guys that were basically doing stair layouts, doing anchor bolt plans, anything that the nice beam and column computer system wouldn't do. The funny part is that I didn't know the difference between a beam and a flange when I started doing that. Or web and a flange, excuse me. I got this job, and I went in with my dad one day. I'm like, okay, give me on a Sunday afternoon. Tell me what I've got. Tell me what I'm doing here. And he goes through all this, and he spends 10 minutes. And you do this, and great. Now, which one's the web and which one's the flange again? The point is, in a week and a half, I was doing this with the CAD department, but I had no experience whatsoever at the time. And that's kind of the way things went through the 90s, starting in the 2000s. Until you get to today when it's even worse. This is my observation of where the industry currently is. Not everybody's, just mine. Labor shortage. Anybody have trouble finding people? Everybody. Obviously, it's not just detailing. It's not just in the shop. It's our tradesmen. It's everywhere. There is a labor shortage. People willing to do this work. I call it job security. At the same time, it's a problem. Some people will look to trade schools for it. Some people look to high school graduates for this. Some people are just finding gamers and teaching them the steel industry. Anybody doing that? Okay. Nothing wrong with finding gamers. that's the approach, teaching about the steel industry. There are programs available out there. The NISD, we used the detailer training CDs. If anybody ever see the detailer training CDs in the 2000s? That was a punishment for my new hires. I put them in front of this computer, and if you can last that week and a half, then maybe you've got a future. But if you quit before then, Dalco's taking this a little step further. The NISD had started developing a new training series, and that kind of faded. Dalco took that over, so they currently have a detailer training, paid detailer training program out there. But what we get is we've talked about more and more computer experience and less construction and technical experience. We've got modelers. Who uses, everybody knows the term modelers and scrubbers. Everybody's got their modelers and their scrubbers. Maybe checkers is a dirty word today. You know, maybe everybody doesn't use checkers. I'll talk about that in my process for a second, but the lines are certainly blurred. There is no draftsman, senior draftsman, chief draftsman, checker. The lines are completely blurred. It's not what it used to be. So now, how do we do it? How do we hire? We take it totally different. These aren't always the easiest people to find, but in the United States, when we're hiring people, we're looking for people with field experience who want to get out of the field. That's my number one hire. If I can get that, I'm better than anything. I want them to know construction and teach them the computer. I don't want them to know computer and teach them construction. My senior, I'm gonna walk around my office real quick. My staff in Brentwood includes a former testing lab inspector, CWI concrete inspector, a former CAD/CAM floor operator, former general contractor, another former general contractor, sheet metal worker, a concrete foreman, and a guy who worked on boats, and one technical guy who's going back to get his engineering degree. But they all have construction experience. I have another guy that we just hired 3 years ago who was trained in a very traditional way, and I hope none of his former partners are in here. If they are, he'll understand this. I've talked to him about it before. You're not allowed in here. You have to leave. I've talked about him before. He's probably the one we've had to talk to the most in our office and work with. He knows the computer. He's worked his way from another fabricator, and they did things a little different. It was a 3-person fabrication shop. There were 3-person detailers that fed their own fabrication shops. They were set in their ways. He was also very limited in what he did, and he never actually got out in the shop and did those things. He only started as a 22-year-old kid and used computers working on this, and he's backwards from everybody else we got in the office. I don't have modelers and I don't have scrubbers. Everybody does everything. Right, wrong, or indifferent, everybody does everything. Certainly there are times where you may start doing script and maybe restart, but there is no process where it finishes here and it hands off to this person. I have an approval team and a fabrication team, but I don't have modelers and scrubbers. Everybody knows how to do everything. And when I say everybody knows how to do everything, that includes checking. No, I don't give them trusses to go check. I don't give them complicated stairs, but new hires, I may want you to check out your boat plans. I want everybody to know the process in every step of it. Right, wrong, or indifferent. They need to know, not only they need to see it, but they need to know how their decisions and what they do affects the next person in line. And I want them to have, if they're detailing, I want them to have ownership of the entire process. I don't want them modeling it and hand it off to somebody else to handle. I want them to have complete ownership of the whole process. So they do everything. So now that I've hired them, how do I train them? Again, we teach them the computer. It's not software specific, but I honestly don't think we have my more senior employees coming out of the field. I tend to steer them toward checkers because they may have a harder time adopting to the computer. That being said, I've got 360 plus senior project managers working in Bluebeam full time and don't use paper anymore. Now they have 55-inch screens in front of their faces and 2 others on the sides, but they don't use paper anymore. They fully do their markups, communicate, keep it on Bluebeam Studio for the next person to be live. And see, they They don't use paper anymore, so they can be taught. Beyond, where it really comes in is keeping everybody involved, just like no different than whether they're modeler, checker, keeping a scrubber, keeping the whole process. I want them to be involved in their training. All big software companies have local seminars, so we send these guys out to them constantly. We may have a seminar come to Nashville, may have 50 spots, they may get 25 from my office on them. They're gonna be there. I want them to hear it firsthand, not from me, I want to hear it from somebody else. We do a lot of lunch and learns in my office, a whole lot. But the biggest thing we do is when we get new software, and if I can give you one takeaway from this, do this. When we get new software, I make them teach me. Now I already know what's in it. Don't feel like I already know what's in the software. But, and I'm not saying when a new bug fix comes out, but when everybody's on 2018, 2019, 2020 release, when that release comes out, I make them break into 2 or 3 people teams and pick a topic. And then they have to give a presentation and educate the rest of the office on the topic. And that may go on, we'll give them 2 weeks per topic, and that may go on for 3 months, till we get it. But they have to teach themselves and be able to teach somebody else. Rather than me showing them on a piece of paper how to do it, I make them learn that way and teach them. So I highly encourage that process. Make them teach you, make your employees get in there and learn it themselves. Get them in the field. Any means possible, get them in the field. If you can't, get pictures, but get them in the field. If you can't, we're not in a position, with safety regulations, everything else, we're not in a position to have somebody go work for Turner for 2 weeks. It's just, we're not that kind of co-op anymore. But if you can get them out there and visually see it and see what their impact is, it goes so far. One of the best stories I ever have, excuse me, take a drink here. Had a 650,000 square foot hospital just north of Nashville going up. And they were having an employee appreciation, not quite a topping out, but kind of an employee appreciation party on site. And so I went up to see it, and the engineer went up, and the CA for the engineer went up. We're all walking the job together, 3 of us. And the engineer's walking around, he goes, "What's all that square stuff on top of the deck?" And the CA goes, "Well, that's the welded wire fabric that you put in every one of your notes on the job." The engineer had no idea what it was. I mean, he's had somebody draw a section for him forever, but he had no clue what it was. Mind blowing. I couldn't believe it, that he did it. And he learned so much that day. See, he got him a welder's mask, and he watched CJP weld, not there the whole time, but part of it going in. He saw a different area, a guy doing a UT test. He saw the guys putting in 2 bolts and plumbing up the columns. It went so far. Anytime I've got the local job with any relationship I've got with a contractor, I get my guys out there to see what's going on, see what we have done. How do we ensure quality? I mentioned the word checkers earlier, and maybe that's a blurred word and some people don't use it anymore. I cannot emphasize the word check enough. It's a personal business decision. I get it. The margins are low. The risk is not worth the margins for me. Okay, you can't. I've got friends in the industry who that check their own work. Nothing leaves my office. If I do it, if my other business partner does it, nothing leaves my office without another set of eyes on it. It would have never happened back in the days of the board. It shouldn't happen now. It's very easy. I always give the example. It's very easy to do a model check and confuse a 5/8 plate for a 3/4 plate when that 3/4 inch plate's required. Even easier to pull a number 6 bar that's shop attached to the bottom of an embed when it's supposed to be a number 8 bar. So we have a multi-step process in our office to do this. If we may get the model and import it, or we may input the model for standpoint of a mill order. First thing we're going to do is have a checker go through that and check everything in the model from a mill standpoint. We do a model check. Model check sounds like a buzzword, a bad buzzword to some people. We do a model check. If somebody models it, we use color systems, everybody can do different color systems, different software, set it up however you want to. We do a model check, and when somebody has finished modeling it, they turn it, tag it that it's been modeled, and it turns a certain color. So then the model checker has to go through, and he's not checking every point to point, all that old garbage, but he is looking for key things. Is there an edge of slab there? So if there is, do we have outrigger plates or, you know, an angle frame out there to support that edge of slab? I'm not checking dimensions on that, just make sure it's there. Is it a moment connection? Do you have a moment connection prep there? Do you have continuity plates in the column there? So they're not checking everything, but they're looking for hot spots, and they have to sign off on that member before it can be scrubbed. Once it goes through, it gets put on paper, then we send it to a QC checker. People, again, are gonna believe here differently about whether you check drawings at all, or whether you fully check before they go out for approval, or whether you partially check. I'm not here to set that for you, obviously. It's between you and your fabricator and the engineer and what they expect, and obviously between your schedule. Your schedule dictates a lot of that. You know, I can't have drawings out in 2 weeks on a 300-ton job and expect me to have it fully checked. It does not work that way. We have a QC where if I'm going from the engineer and architect, they're not looking at my details. They're looking at my plans, they're looking at my sections, and as a 3D modeler, detailer, if I'm gonna screw something up, I'm gonna screw up a hanging lintel system, or a floor frame system, or something that I have to kind of manually fudge and manipulate. I'm not gonna mess up generally a beam to beam connection. I'm gonna mess up a fascia. So before it goes out for approval to the engineer architect, we will fully check the plan, we'll fully check the sections, we'll fully check the miscellaneous, we'll make sure all of our questions are in order. Then while it's out, we get the old yellow highlighter and red pen out, and we do a full paper check. There are a lot of checks in this system, and that doesn't make it perfect, certainly. It makes it a lot better than model checking and looking at yourself and moving on. That's how you ensure quality. You have to do the same check that you did on the board 30 years ago, 40 years ago. It doesn't go away. Now with that, you have to make something happen with that. Number one, you have to provide feedback to your detailers. I think I mentioned that a little bit in the slide below, but we've got, maybe you've got a detailer that everybody likes, that's the new guy, and he's not doing a good job. And maybe your senior checkers like him, and they kind of hide that work and they get it fixed. Now, they could be the opposite. You could have senior checkers that can't stand this guy and rat him out, and he's the worst thing in the world, and get him out of here. Or you could have guys that he's trying to do his best, he's got a family, and let's help him and, you know, hold him under your wing and protect him. You've got to know that. So you've got to provide feedback. When somebody messes up, show them they messed up. Don't give it to somebody else to fix and get out of the way. They need to know they made an error. They need to know where they made the error so they don't make the same error the next time. We have weekly Monday morning PM meetings with our senior staff, and we go job by job over every job. My business partner and I sit down. We have a Monday morning kickoff with the whole group, and one at a time you parade in our office. Tell me where you're at. Tell me what's going on this week. Tell me what problems you're facing, and let's get on with the week and tell me what I need to help you with. Stay involved. Know what's going on. Whether it's in the United States, out the United States, you can't let these projects be out of your hands 3 weeks. You can't ensure quality with your detailers if you don't know what's going on with your detailers. If you're big enough to have teams, change your teams regularly. Personalities wear out. People get in grooves and do things a certain way and let things slide. And I'll catch that later because Joe's going to be behind me. Change your teams up regularly. Don't let them get complacent. Find new staff, just a new manager with 2 new people, pull a checker that's on that team over to this and switch it up. Check in. That goes back to my providing feedback. That's what you've got to check in with your guys and say, you've been working with level A employee, you've been working with level B employee for this job for 6 weeks. How's he doing? Does he need help? Can I do anything here? Be involved. Audit the submittals. I don't do it as much as I would like to. I don't do it as much as I should, but probably once every 6 weeks, I'll pull a submittal myself. It's been through, maybe it's just gone for approval, maybe it's out for fabrication, but I'll pull it and do a 6 to 7 hour check on it myself and look behind everything that's been done and see if I agree or disagree, see what I think's been missed, and go from there. All right, anybody in here own or use non-US detailing labor? It's fair. The experience is harder to find. If I'm hiring somebody overseas, that experience is harder to find, certainly. We tend to find engineers, that in overseas that are willing to, that want to be detailers. We tend to find people that swap from company to company and they have some experience already. So finding that guy in the field who's tired of working in the field and wants to change his career, that's harder to find. That's the only thing in my presentation that changes. Changing up staff, everything about ensuring quality, everything ensuring steps, nothing there changes. Step by step, I do everything the same. So, and y'all been very quiet, and I've talked very fast, and we're only 30 minutes in, and I'm just about done here. If you're doing PDHs for New York, you have to have an assessment question. So my question here to everybody is, where can you find a surplus of quality trained detailers in 2019? And the answer is nowhere. You can't. All right. So honestly, that's it. Again, the PDH code is 64784. Does anybody have any questions, any comments, any ideas to throw out there? I really, this one may be about 10 minutes shorter than I usually do, but I like to keep 15 to 20 minutes in for questions at the end. I like to make it interactive. Yes, sir.
So you talked about onshore and offshore. How do you blend your onshore with your offshore teams, or are they completely separate?
They are blended.
Okay.
They are blended.
So that's how you get your kind of field experience into that team.
And sending pictures. And if we've had an offshore team since 2003. They've grown to, our margins are about 2.5 to 1 right now. When I get chances, they come here. I've had people here for 3 months, I've had them for 6 weeks. I've met people in London in the middle. But anytime I get a picture of something they've done, I send them a picture of what they have done so they can see what they've done in action. When they were here, they were on job sites. So yes, whatever means you can get them the same experience, because if you're, say, in India, there's not a lot of steel. There's a lot of marble. There's not a lot of steel. So whatever means necessary, get them the exposure. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
So how can the fabricators help get the detailers what they need or talk about that?
How can the fabricators help give the detailers what they need? That is a great question. We work with 7 or 8 different fabricators. My best friends in the industry, I'll say, and it's probably because they're friends, is we can have frank and honest discussions about what my team did. They're not scared to say, hey, we made it through this. I need you to know what happened. I need you to see this. This got here, and not. Certainly, there are, $100,000 discussions about errors. That's not where I'm going. What I'm talking about is, it got through it. I got a bad attitude from this employee on this. I wish we had done this differently. Just sit down. Kind of the follow-up meetings that we have internally, the follow-up meeting with the fabricator externally. And honestly, I have the same conversation with them. They have new hires. I say, your boy's screwing up here. He's answering questions on the fly. He's answering incorrectly. He's trying to move it on to keep you happy, but he's not giving me the right answer. So being able to have a non-heated, honest, two-way conversation about how it went between the detailer and fabricator is the best way I can get feedback from a fabricator. And I do appreciate that question. That's a good question. Yes, sir.
How many people have you brought in from the field successfully to detail? And is there a trend as to what works better in terms of age, experience? I mean, these are obviously records, right? You're getting that
No. Just let me walk through a couple of them. So my business partner, and he was the head of construction administration for Stan Lindsay up to 1990. And he opened up his own testing lab in 1990, and then opened up a detailing office in 97. So the first employee I have is a concrete inspector and CWI that worked for him. he waited, he didn't come over to 2003. He sold the testing company in 2000 or 2002, so in 2003, he left the new testing company and came back to work for us. It took him about 2 years to really get it, but we jumped right in, and he had seen enough of it. He came in at about 38. Okay, so he's 55 now. I've got a CAD CAM operator who's one of my best detailers and project managers. He worked the floor of a CAM company in Nashville. It didn't take him long at all, and he's been with me now 11 years. I've got a former general contractor who is 73 or 74 right now. He came to me at about 65. He was one of the harder ones to get involved in the process, and he's a senior checker. I'm not gonna lie and say I got him in detail. He's a senior checker, but he got pretty comfortable with it pretty quick. I've got a sheet metal worker who is in his late 50s right now. He came to us at about 45. He'd gotten out of the sheet metal industry, and he was driving a truck at this time. Got sick of driving a truck, and we had a guy that worked for us at the time that was a friend of his, and we interviewed him. He was ready to go. Took him a few years. The learning curve is not different. I'm not saying we're gonna go in and, instantly I can turn somebody into detailing. The concrete foreman came to me, mid-40s again. Ideally, and they're harder and harder to find, ideally, I would love the guy that has been to Auburn or Purdue, gotten their construction, degree, and has been to work for a contractor for 2 or 3 years and realized the field and the travel is not for me. It's harder and harder because they've got a great little carrot they dangle out, and my project engineer becomes a junior project manager, becomes a senior project manager, becomes a project executive, and here's a friend of mine that's 36 years old and is managing multi-million-dollar accounts across the country. That's a tough carrot to dangle, and that's the hardest one to find, but that's my ideal employee to find, is the trained GC who's been out in the field 3 or 4 years and decided the field's not for him, or to travel. Maybe he wants to be a family man and stay put. They're hard to come by. No, not you.
I just got a point that may help people understand that the process is not simple when you find that guy. What is your true time frame from the time you find that guy to where he is really producing at a level where you can say he's making money?
Obviously, that's gonna vary. The question is, what's the true time? It's a difficult process. What's the true time frame for when that guy's actually making you money? I call it 3 years minimum is my rule. 3 years minimum before they're being really productive. Somebody is over their shoulder constantly. And we have a saying, there's some guys we get that, there's a cap here. You can't get 10 gallons of what in that 2-gallon bucket. It's a saying we have in our office. There's only so much you're gonna get out of certain people. And once you get that, once you figure out where that cap is, then you start working on what else you can get in, or where do you prioritize their work. That being said, we don't have a lot of turnover. I've taken a couple of risks. I've hired guys that had experience and had 7 or 8 years experience in software, and when I realized what I got was they were scrubbers. They'd scrubbed for 8 years. Didn't have a clue on how the 3D model worked. Didn't have a clue of visualization. Now, you tell them to put a 5/16 weld down, they can do that all day long, but they did not understand construction whatsoever. I had a guy that my process failed with. He had an agriculture degree. He was a golf course superintendent and wanted to get out of the field. There was not any more opportunities if he was an assistant superintendent and wasn't going to be a lead superintendent unless he moved to a new golf course in North Carolina and didn't want to uproot his family. But he had an architectural degree. He had an agriculture degree from Vanderbilt, which included knowledge of civil plans and being able to read plans and whatnot. So we gave him a shot. He didn't work out. I have more success stories than I have failure stories. A lot more. Yes, sir.
So what kind of tactics do you use to attract those kind of individuals?
It's a lot of get in jobs, find good relationships with contractors, project engineer. The person I'm probably looking for is the project engineer on a job that's green as can be when we start that job, and maybe it's been a 2-year job. And, you know, we'll be talking through the job and getting to know each other, and we get to the end, and maybe he's, you know, really gung-ho about his career, maybe he's not, you know, when we have that conversation. The others really have found us. I just be honest, they found us. We've hunted down. We've sought out 3 of these, I'll take, on my detailing side, take 15 people in my US office. Of those 15 people, 10 are field personnel that we've hired. Other 5 are either family or people that have true, you know, CAD back or computer backgrounds we've hired the other way. But of those 10 that come out of the field, 5 we've recruited and 5 had a connection to us and came looking to us. So the one that failed was a personal friend of mine. And that was a hard conversation because he moved 4 houses away from me after I hired him. Anyway. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
What kind of advice do you have for during the curve? You know, you're learning the business. I want you to be able to cut your teeth on something, but not too much. What kind of advice there?
I've got a guy right now. He's a good example of this. So the question is, how do you handle the learning curve? I want you to cut your teeth, but not too much. My most recent hire was a friend of mine. Was a high school. He's a high school athletics director and math teacher, and he had a fellow math teacher whose husband was laid off. He worked for an electrical company, and he was QA, QC. Nothing about steel, nothing about construction, but he is QA procedures, up, down, left, right, ISO certified, this, that, and the other. Thought he'd be a good, after talking to him, I thought he'd be a good candidate for a checker because he's just got that mentality. So I think for 9 months, he checked every anchor bolt and embed we had in the company. You know, certainly we don't start, you know, he's not doing trusses and that kind of thing. His learning curve was actually very quick. I'm very impressed with this guy. He does, go back to my slides, my QC process. Let's just talk about this. I'm not gonna put any new guy on a mill check. Certainly not gonna put him on a mill check. There's too much money involved in ordering the steel wrong to have him screw that up. A good place for my new guys are the model check, because I've got 3 levels behind them, and the QC process before it goes out for approval, because I've still got the paper check, the hard yellow highlighter, red pen check behind it. So I'm gonna put them somewhere in the middle where they're not critical on the upfront cost. And I've got somebody behind them that has another set of eyes to catch it if they screwed up. So.
What's the ratio of checkers to detailers?
2 to 1, 2 detailers to a checker. If I'm doing a 10-day sequence, if I'm doing a multi-sequence job and I'm figuring 10 days for a detailer and checker to get that sequence out, and this up front put it on paper, it's about 8 on detailing and 2 on checking, and then I've got another 3 to 3.5 on checking on the back end. So I'm about 8 to 5. So maybe it's a little more than 2. It's 1 3/4 to 1. Let's say that. All right, well, nothing else, then we got 20 extra minutes for coffee here. So, thanks. This was a surprise for 80. Yes, sir. Sorry.
I have a question, and I'm trying to make sure I say this right. You know, nowadays we got, you know, you got Tech Club and a lot of these fancy programs, and I've taken this experience of someone who's overseeing all these different detailers who model and put these products out. Yet you're dealing with clients and they have specific needs. I've got some people down here to talk today about, you got that scribing beams and putting, hey, you're looking at the drawings, you check the drawings and everything, but you don't have the knowledge about the inner workings of the software to check it as far as, hey, this instant file doesn't work. What happened? I'm not a programmer.
Yeah.
You know, and I wanted to get maybe some input on that, And I struggle with that, because when it all works, the models look good and whatever, but there's a lot of little inner things in there, and the clients are getting more specific as to the type of ways that they want it. Hey, I want the mark numbers here, I want it centered, I want inch and a half high and whatever, I need you to be able to get this done, okay? You know, so I just wondered about that. We're getting into handrail now, and they got programs that will allow the detail in such a way so that the machine will actually do all the coats and the cuts and whatever. Like, you don't want to have to manually put that in. So as a detail, I need to make sure that your product that comes to me gives me that output. I don't want to hear about excuses or what, it just didn't happen. The files didn't work.
Yeah. So the question,
CNC file.
so we're just repeating it. The question basically is, we've talked about quality and a detailer. How do you ensure as a detailer quality in your downstream product, being it the NC files, the fabricator setup, whatnot, making sure the fabricator's very specific needs, which change fabricator to fabricator, how they are met as an internal as a detailing standalone office? That's a loaded question. No, it's a good question, and I don't mind answering it at all. A couple of steps. Number one, depending on the size of your company as a detailer, you may have somebody that, maybe you have a drawing coordinator that does transmittals. Maybe every project manager does their own transmittals. I don't know. We have a drawing coordinator who is responsible for transmittals and all CNC KISS data comes through this one person, okay? Internally, we've written a couple of programs to sort out, you know, where, and all this will get the very software depending on what you're using, but for us, we've written programs, so you've already sent this CNC, this is new, here's a report showing you which sequences these, if we've already sent it to you, these went in sequence 1 and 2, so now you're getting these new in sequence 3, here's what you're getting. We have somebody managing that end of it for what the fabricator is actually getting. As far as conforming with what the fabricator needs, I keep a pretty tight thumb on that. There's 2 people in the office that are allowed to touch setup and allowed to coordinate with the fabricator what they need, me and one other. Actually, it's me and one other person if I'm not there. I have another person behind that. Something would happen to me, I have people ready to do it, that are capable to do it, but we control our setup. We not only, and part of that's policies and procedures. You know, the fabricator's gonna have a pre-detailing meeting, hopefully, and they're gonna have their setup. We have our own internal setup sheet we go through. Is this required? Is this required? Is this? Are they gonna be CNC? Is this gonna be a BIM job? Do we have weekly meetings? Do we have this? Do we have that? And we'll go through this and then hand that off to the project manager, and here's our setup. Here's what we've done. I have set up this, boom, 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 in the software. And I've, even on our setup sheet, I've color coded. If it's green, I've done it. If it's yellow, there's some question out here that's a follow-up asking what we need, and you're gonna have to do this. I'm handing this to you now, and I've asked a question, but this isn't resolved yet, and you need to handle this. So we've got a tight control on what happens and a tight control on everybody knowing what they still have to do when we have that handoff meeting. So, does that answer your question? Kind of, sort?
Well, somewhat. I mean, some of these processes are kind of new.
Yeah, you need, it's honestly, I guess the better part of the question, they're me and the same guy that do the setup. We are the technology guys in our office. We're the guys, and I'm the only one of us 2 here this week, but we're the guys that are here talking to the operators, knowing what's new, knowing what's next, knowing what the software can do now, meeting with that fabricator and say, hey, oh, by the way, you can do this. Do you want to try this on this job? Let's talk about this. So we have people that are in charge of knowing the technology and knowing the capabilities too. So, you're going back there first.
Yesterday, we heard a lot from the lawyers talking about project delays.
Mm-hmm.
I want to learn from your experience, Dave, how you handle substantial changes in design drawings that pretended to start off with IFC.
How do I handle substantial changes in design drawings that pretended to start off as IFCs? Wow. Nobody ever gets that, did they? Everybody's got great drawings that are perfect right now, right?
Right.
I tell you what, it's kind of a 2-part question. Number one, this management experience that I got when I was 16, 17, and 18, dealing with 200-person schedules. We've gone so far in helping me move this, move that, pull person A there, pull person B there, juggle my schedule. That is invaluable to me being able to juggle that schedule. To the bigger question of how do we handle the people, we do, that's a very loaded question. There's gonna be 10,000 ways to do this, but the best takeaway I can give is we do a pre-detailing review. So before, not before, because we've always gotta have the middle order yesterday. I get that. But at the same time somebody's doing the input, somebody else on that team is going through looking for questions. And the first thing we do is send off, I know these are IFCs, but before we can start talking schedule, these are the problems we see. We try not to wait till we go through sequence by sequence to get those problems. We try to, and certainly they're still gonna be there. And nothing's gonna make the engineer more mad than, hey, I thought we dealt with your 95 questions up front. Why are you still hitting me with more questions? Well, because you're drawing stuff, that's what. But we try to weed out as many questions as we can up front before we start detailing, and honestly, before we commit to a schedule. We give tentative schedules, pending release, we reviewed these drawings, you're not paying us yet to go through and be thorough. It's in our case, it's not quite worded quite like that, but we've given a good review, but, final schedule is subject to us seeing what we're dealing with. So that's kind of how we try to protect ourselves in that front. And I've got 10 jobs going on right now, and all 10 of those jobs have some sort of delay in them for your very specific reason. I've got one job that is stamped January 11th, and the engineer says for all reactions are shown, and because it's delegated design, all reactions are shown, contact the engineer for reactions not shown. No reactions on a rigid frame beam on the jobs, and these have been CDs for 3 months now. I don't know, so, yes, sir.
What do you find reasonable for RFI answers when it leaves the detailer's office? Because it seems to be taking forever now to answer.
What do you find reasonable for RFI answers when it leaves the detail?
I mean,
No, time
period
frame.
of answer.
Time frame, certainly. Y'all are giving the good questions today. Nice, easy answer questions here. As everybody does, we really try to do a direct contact method. And I said with an engineer that we're doing some stuff with last night, and I told him that he was the unicorn in the room right now because less and less engineers want to talk to detailers. He still works for us, and I try to respect his time, and I don't have my detailer call him every hour, but I try to get them to give a summary once a day and send an email once a day, say, hey, John, here's what I've seen, boom, 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 boom. And unless he's traveling, usually the next day he responds. That's the good side. The bad side is the job that I'm working on right now, that I had a meeting on Monday. The engineer answered the question day 1, day 2 he didn't, day 3 he didn't, day 4 he didn't, day 5 he didn't, and I told the GC maybe it's time to start the RFI process. So they did, and a week's gone by, and we had a meeting Monday to go over the questions, and he wasn't really sure what we were talking about in the meetings. Why are we here? I was gonna answer those today. We're too busy on other jobs and haven't had time to work on this job yet. It's been about 9 days since I've asked that question.
How can you keep a schedule?
You can't.
It takes 14 days. to
You
answer.
can't, and then you're preaching to a choir of people here singing your praises, because you can't, the answers don't come in, and you get pushed back, and everybody gets pushed back except the contractor schedule. Now fix it. Now come work overtime and make it happen because everybody else was behind. Reasonable for us, if I've got an RFI process, reasonable for us is 3 to 4 days. They want 2 weeks, I can't afford 2 weeks. I can't afford 3 to 4 days. If I'm asking a question, it's because you got me working on the drawings and now I can't work because I've got a question. Hopefully those bigger questions that shut us down, we've caught on this pre-review process that I talked before. Hopefully the questions we're dealing with now are minuscule that we can work around while we're getting an answer. Not the showstopper, but that's not a guarantee.
But with time, the drawings are getting worse.
Oh, yeah.
They don't coordinate between trains.
Well, no,
And it is a job of the steel detailer.
but everything goes back to industry-wide. Labor shortage and more trust on computers. Less knowledge, labor shortage, and more trust on computers. And detailers are as guilty as anybody. It's detailers, it's engineers, it's architects, everybody in the process has more trust and less knowledge.
2 questions. Number 1, do you input from scratch or use anybody's engineering model
Okay.
as your seed model to start with and use all the way through the process?
I'll come back to you for number two. Do we input from scratch or do we use somebody's model? If I can get an engineer's model, I want the engineer's model. I've actually said that for about 15 years here. Whether I use it or not, it's a different story, but I want the engineer's model. Typically, if I get the engineer's model and we're working in a Revit form, they're coordinated with the architect, and if I pull theirs in, at least I know where my origins are, and I don't have to worry about translating this model and lining things up later when I go downstream. When we get the engineer's model, we'll pull it in and evaluate it. They could do a very good job, they could do not such a good job. It may be that they've been in Revit and they finished doing concrete beams, which in Revit you offset to the left, and they switched to steel and they kept putting them in, and if they had 12, if it's a 24-inch beam with a 12-inch wide flange, the beams are offset 6 inches. Because they were just in concrete beams, or maybe it came in from RAM and they didn't do conversion and all my columns are node to node and not splices. We'll evaluate that. The engineers we work with, we're about 70% success in taking their model. The other 30% we'll throw away and just use it for origin coordination.
How do you know the difference? How do you know when to pull that trigger?
Well, if the check is part of my process is the point. We're either going to input it and check it, or we're going to import it and check it. So if my checkers start working and they start seeing red flags, then we'll look at it and start evaluating it and make the decision as how bad is it? Is it better to fix or go away? But it starts with checking it. Not, we never take them all from somebody and run the mill. That's just not gonna happen. So, yes, sir.
You were talking about your team process and you have a document person handling things.
Mhm.
What about the RFIs and the change order initiation? Who's issuing and tracking those?
So, while they could be tied together, I'm treating them as two different issues. The RFIs, we use, I'll just throw out FabTrol, we use FabTrol for documentation. It could be FabTrol, FabSuite, in-house, whatever you want to use, or part of your software. But the individual project managers handle the RFIs, tracking through the FabTrol system. We have a couple of fabricators who have their own tracking system. Some is fill out this Excel file and ask us for the number. Other is we have a new online system and everything goes through this. So it depends on who we're working for, but if we're in charge of it, the individual project managers handle their RFIs. As far as change orders, unless something happens that it's due that week, I'll switch up, but normally me or one other person process the change orders. And so my team will typically get a set of drawings and go through and line out the changes and put hours associated with those. And the project manager in my Monday morning meetings will communicate, this is what's going on, these are these new drawings, this is how much time we've got in that, and I'll decide if that's enough time or not, or whether I want to bump it and assign a dollar value to it, and me or one other person send that out. So, but the team is integral in helping communicate to me where those changes are. I don't have a separate estimating team looking for this. The people that are in the weeds are the ones telling me where the problems are.
In the Colorado market, GCs are hiring help with new structural engineering. A lot of the engineers are hiring to have a GC company versus developing their own staff. Residential fabricators are not being responsible charge for paperwork.
About 75% of the time. So the question is, in the Colorado market, detailers are being hired out. General contractors having engineers hire out the detailers as part of the process and do our work in that market. I've worked in that situation in the Southeast since 2001. We get involved typically in an early process where we have relationships with engineers, we have relationships with contractors, and we typically get involved in bigger projects where it's 60 to 65% developed. Typically, these are not design, bid, build. These are negotiated jobs these are select bid. So the people that are usually in the select bid are after the process and know what's going on after the same thing. So it's not as tense. But yes, there can certainly be issues with that setup. But yeah, we do it about 75% of our work that way. not necessarily through the engineer, but through we are a combined design detailing firm, and not most of our projects, because the design firm operates totally as its own entity, but we do have the combined job that we do. But mostly we work for contractors, or occasion, if the owners have a couple of owners that they're not ready to hire the contractor yet, they still go ahead. We've got a couple of owners that do that with us. No. Yes, sir.
How do you protect yourself against material availability issues?
How do we protect ourselves against material availability issues, fabricators? So typically, what's gonna happen with us is, you're released, I need a mill order tomorrow. We just got released because we're pushing hard, because been told them mill's closed tomorrow, we need this tomorrow. I keep an eye, obviously not on everybody, but what typically runs everybody in trouble are the, mill 2 jumbo shapes at Nucor. So the heavy 14 columns, so sometimes you're gonna get in trouble with some 21s or a rolling that you're gonna miss, but typically it's the big shapes and that are coming exclusive from Nucor. So I do keep an eye on that personally, of, looking at their website, once a week and see when the next casting's coming up and this and that. And if I've got jobs bidding, I know that that's gonna be my next headache. So if I need to pull somebody off thinking I'm gonna get a job, and maybe I run risk 48 hours worth of input, maybe I do it. If I'm thinking that castings are gonna have, casting happens Monday, they're gonna want orders in Thursday before, so they're probably gonna get released Wednesday, maybe I go ahead and I think I'm gonna get it, maybe I go ahead and start Monday. That's my best defense, but it's.
My experience, my issues have always been more smaller. It's in the book, but it's not an available piece.
So,
On not ADM type.
anybody from Atlas Tube in this session? So the hang-ups, 1885 steel, let's talk about it, that's the one I get all the time. We communicate, we're aware of the shapes that are problems, we communicate this. 1885 in the southeast is a big problem. Atlas Tube has done a great job selling to the AISC the new 1885 shapes, bigger, better, more consistent, get better R values for sizing it. And they've opened 3 warehouses on the west coast to house them. Well, they've educated all the engineers that 1885 is the way to go. That's great, put this in. So all the engineers change their design specs in their software to 1885 with the new values. Well, what they haven't told you is, if you're on the East Coast, typically you have to mill roll these. And if I've got a brace frame with 8 8 by halves and 8 8 by 3/8 and 8 8 by 5/16, I don't have enough tube to mill roll. Yet the engineers now designed this, and I don't have steel that's strong enough to meet the requirements. So if I see that, I guess that's a good example. I go through the specs and look what's required, and if I see 1885, that's my first red flag on my pre-detailing concern as we start the job. So that, I guess that may not answer your question, Jason. That's a example of how we try to protect ourselves against it.
Your answer is experience.
Yes, answer is experience. That's, you get into 24-103 versus 104, which one are they really rolling today, that kind of thing. Yeah, that's experience. Well, I thought this was gonna be done at 8:25, and I am glad we opened it up. It is 8:58. So, I really appreciate the crowd here. I did not expect this at 8 o'clock on a Thursday morning. I appreciate the feedback, very interactive crowd. Let me flip to the end here. One more time for those who need it. PDH number is 64784. All right, thank you, everybody.